Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really big shift in global politics. Canada, one of America's oldest and closest friends, is making a pretty stunning pivot toward China.
And it all kind of kicks off with this really provocative quote from Mark Carney, a major figure in Canada. He dropped this line after a huge trip to Beijing, and, well, let's just say it got a lot of people talking in Western capitals.
Because, what we're talking about here is so much more than a simple trade deal. This is a massive geopolitical signal. It's a calculated move that has Washington seriously worried, and at the same time has Beijing chalking it up as a major win.
To really get why this is such a big deal, you have to understand just how icy the relationship between Canada and China has been. I mean, we're talking about almost a decade of deep diplomatic freeze that really started back in 2018 with the arrest of a Huawei executive. So this visit, it's a sudden, pretty dramatic thaw.
Okay, so what do they actually agree on in Beijing? At its core, it's a really straightforward trade-off, but one that has these huge, sprawling strategic implications.
So on one side, you have Canada basically giving China's world-leading electric vehicle industry a major entry point into North America. And in return, China is throwing open its massive market to Canada's farmers, who've really been struggling. They even tossed in visa-free travel for Canadians, which is a nice little bonus.
And just look at the numbers here to see how big a deal this is. Canada had a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, mostly because of pressure from the US. This deal just nukes that, dropping it all the way down to 6.1%. That is a huge concession.
And here's what Canada gets for it. China, in turn, slashed its own punishing tariffs on Canadian canola seed from a staggering 85% down to just 15%. For Canadian farmers who were completely shut out of that market, this is an absolute game changer.
So this brings us to the million-dollar question, right? Why on earth would Canada make a move that it knew would make its most important ally, the United States, so angry? Well, the answer seems to boil down to one thing: economic survival. Just take a look at this chart. An incredible 75% of everything Canada exports goes to one single country, the United States. That kind of dependency makes Canada's entire economy incredibly vulnerable to whatever's happening in American politics and trade policy. So when you're facing that kind of unpredictability from your biggest trading partner, Canada's leadership clearly felt they had to diversify. This is a really pragmatic move, and it's championed by people like Mark Carney, who, remember, is an economist. He's focused on the bottom line for Canada, not necessarily on old-school ideology.
And yeah, this pivot didn't just happen overnight. It's really the result of years of growing tension and economic pain that started back in 2018, got worse during the trade wars, and finally led to this big strategic reset under new leadership. Okay, so let's flip the script and look at this from Washington's point of view. And as you can probably guess, the reaction was not great. To say the U.S. is deeply concerned would be a massive understatement. The number one fear in both the White House and in Detroit is that Canada has just kicked open a giant backdoor for Chinese electric vehicles to flood the entire North American market, completely sidestepping all of the hefty U.S. tariffs.
For the U.S., this isn't just about business competition. They see electric vehicles as a critical, strategic technology for the future. So this deal, from their perspective, doesn't just threaten American car companies. It weakens the West's united front against China and raises some really serious national security questions about all the data these smart cars can collect.
So while Washington is worrying, you can bet Beijing is celebrating. Over there, this deal is being seen as a huge diplomatic and strategic victory.
And what's really important from China's perspective is this. They've successfully managed to pull a core G7 member, one of America's closest allies, a little bit closer into their own economic orbit.
This move really checks a lot of boxes for China. It proves they can build new partnerships even when the U.S. is applying pressure. It gets them a vital new market for their already dominant EV industry, and it sends this powerful signal to the world that we're moving away from a globe dominated by just one superpower.
And that brings us right back to that big, controversial phrase, a new world order. What does something like that actually mean when the rubber hits the road?
Well, what it really points to is a shift from the US-led world we've known for decades to a multipolar one. That's a world with many different centers of power, where countries have a lot more options than they used to. And that means the very nature of alliances is changing. We seem to be moving away from the old model of these rigid ideological blocks, the you're with us or against us way of thinking. Instead, countries like Canada are chasing these more flexible, issue-based partnerships. They can team up with China on trade while at the same time siding with the U.S. on security. It's all about pragmatism now, not ideological purity.
So, at the end of the day, this whole deal really puts a spotlight on a tough choice for countries like Canada. When your economic needs clash with your historical alliances, which way do you go? It really suggests that in this new, emerging multipolar world, the old rigid alliances, well, they just might not be enough anymore.